Welcome back to a lifetime of Mafia tales. Today's episode is never before seen footage to all of our YouTube subscribers. These two clips were exclusively for our Patreon subscribers only. Unfortunately, Sal was pretty sick this week, so we didn't get to record our weekly episode. But this is something new to everyone on YouTube. The first clip shown here, we talk about Mafia hit theories. Sal also takes us back to 1965 when he first got his start in the mob. And he also talks about meeting Michael Franzese and as well Sonny Franzese. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more shows like this. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon channel for more exclusive videos just like the one you're watching today. And without further ado, let's get in today's episode.
Yeah. You could read about it today. I was thumbing through looking at Sam Giancana. I once did a Geraldo show with the daughter, Antoinette Giancana, and I had lunch with her and we talked. And in the bio, when you look up on Wikipedia, it said that possibly the CIA killed Sam Giancana. I mean, who would know this? You know, who would know why? Who would know how this happened? But this stuff leaks out over years.
Yeah, and you bring up Sam, and he was cooking the sausages and peppers, and that's when he was, some guy came down there and just shot him.
Right.
And I don't know if anyone was ever convicted for it, but
no
if
one
the CIA was behind it, then I doubt it.
Who knows what really happened? You know, Sam Giancana was involved with the Kennedy clan. The father, Joseph Kennedy, was involved with Sinatra. I mean, there was a lot of involvements, but nobody knows exactly why he was killed. Like the day before he was supposed to go to testify.
You know what else? I was going to say, you know what else that he was involved with too was with the Fidel Castro, the Cuba dictator, about failing to assassinate him with whatever, how they were going to do that. So maybe that's why the whole CIA aspect is involved, because they didn't want to get that out there.
Yeah. The CIA was, who knows how secretive that was. And I mean, I've always been fascinated with 3 Days of the Condor, the CIA movie.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Just the whole concept of a hit squad inside the CIA, I thought was really interesting. Whether or not it took place,
right?
If you're to look at the movie, the 3 Days of the Condor, it's fascinating. You know, there was the CIA inside the CIA. So I mean, it's similar to the mob. You know, there's mob hit squads that were secretive. Some of the bosses used, that wasn't something that was readily public about how they assigned certain killers. A lot of this stuff started to surface, so in the last 10, 15 years, if you read about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, there's the crew and factions that would go and make their own decisions. And I mean, hell, there was, even John Gotti that made his and took out the boss. So, I mean, it's possible that people do these internal hits or go rogue and do whatever the hell they want. So I mean, it might not be the whole CIA against Sam Giancana, but I mean, there's a group of people. But I mean, that's what me and you will be talking about on our podcast too. It's like we could talk about your history, and we also could talk about other guys we do some research and stuff on. And like Sam. But
I like the history of the mob because it's
same here.
There's no doubt it connects to government, it connects socially, it connects in a business sense. There's just a lot of history that people probably would have never believed, but for sure it's there. And who knows how much history eventually will surface between Donald Trump and the mob. I mean, nobody really disputes the fact that you had to have a connection to build buildings in New York City in the 70s and the 80s. Mm-hmm. So eventually a lot of this stuff surfaces and it comes out. Whether or not to believe it, that's another part. How much can we believe,
Yeah, I mean, interesting topics like that as well we'll be able to cover on this podcast. So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, if you want to go back into 1965, I suppose is the overall theme of this episode. I mean, what other key events were going on at this time?
Well, I mean, I was so deeply entrenched in my uncle's hotel, I wasn't paying real attention. I mean, I'm just a 20-year-old kid just trying to follow my uncle's, orders. Do this, do that, go down and take care of the basement, switch the bottles of whiskey out, It was fascinating. I learned, at a young age, it was sort of the bait and switch from Uncle Tony. He was a character, man. I mean, he had cheap scotch and he put them in expensive bottles. I mean, after 2 or 3 drinks, I don't think anybody would ever guessed anyway.
No, hell no. You
But
just got a
you know,
little buzz going, so you ain't gonna know.
right,
But I mean, no, so you were able to get really close with him, and then I think, even with our next episode, we could start off as you becoming a bookmaker and your
right,
bookmaking operation. So we'll go into
right,
that with our probably our next episode. But I'm thinking too, with in 1965, you were in his hotel, you were working and you were serving drinks. I mean, to different kind of mafia guys. I mean, was there any characters that stood out to you? I mean, you might not recall their names because, like you said, you didn't ask questions back in that particular era. But I mean, was there any characters that stood out?
Well, Sonny Franzese stood out, and he had
Yeah.
guys around him. Like one guy was Whitey Florio. I talked to Whitey Florio. Another guy was um, I'm trying to think of their names, but Johnny Irish. These guys will later on became well-known mob guys. I mean, eventually they all went to jail and died, but Sonny continued. I mean, he lived to like 100 years old.
I
So
think
it was
103 or
interesting.
4, man.
It was interesting. Yeah, I kept reading about him. Eventually, I met Michael. I met Michael briefly in '78. I think it was '77. I think when he got made, he hung out at Cataldo's restaurant, Dominic Cataldo's restaurant, which was only 3 blocks from my house. I briefly met him, and then I later learned that became a made member. And then, years and years later, sometime I think maybe 2013, 14, 15, something like that. I did a show for National Geographic, and Michael and I spent 2 days traveling around promoting the show. And I liked Michael. He was a classy guy and sharp as a tack. And, people could say what they want, but he lived an interesting life. And I always said to Michael, we were driving in the limousine over to Philadelphia one day. I go, Michael, we have a television series sitting here. You at the top and me at the bottom. I mean, you were born into this royalty. Your dad was Sonny Franzese, and
Yeah.
I come up from the street, and he
Mhm.
laughed. And National Geo took us to Philly. We promoted the series in Philly, and then we promoted it in Boston. And I got to know him like recently at this age, and he was a sharp guy, good speaker, and I liked him. So there was nothing that didn't surprise me about what kind of classy guy he was. He turned his life around, became a Christian speaker, and I thought that was cool because I sort of had the same idea, like leave the mob and do something else.
Yeah, and that's you've written 2 books, and the one, The Sins of the Father. That's when you really go into detail about wanting to change your life and becoming a public speaker, and just helping out youth and other people that are involved with crime. And
Right.
I think that's a really good thing to want to do. That's why I was like drawn to your story because it's a story of redemption. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, I did this, and you're just like, oh, I'm so cool. It's like you actually, you tell the story, but at the same time, you don't have you don't have that same mindset of like, oh, yeah, and this thing is still cool, or you try to promote it
Well,
like it is. You know what I mean? So that's why it's important that you do that.
yeah, when you're young in your 20s, you can just about get excited about anything. Little did I know, as the years went by, I lost the desire for crime. I found there was other things I could do, and it took me years to figure out that my life inside crime wasn't so much about the prize. My life was really about the chase. It'd be like a hunter, once you know, you get to the end of the chase, then you want another chase.
Hmm.
So that's what I realized. It took me maybe till I was 35 or 40 years old after I left the life of crime that there was something else to do that you could get excited about. Of course, we'll touch on that later, but it's amazing to look back. I mean, I'm 78 years old today, and I could talk about this stuff. I could get excited about it, but not gloat on it.
Right. That's true. I mean, that's important because there's other people out there that may have went through similar stuff that you've went through, and that they understand that, hey, man, I changed my life around, like coming from you. But if you
Yeah,
say like me, I'm not no street guy or nothing like that. Like, oh man, I didn't want to hear that. But but coming from a real guy that was around this kind of
yeah,
criminal life, it
sure.
means a lot more. 100%.
Yeah.
And so back to 1965 though as well. What was the mafia structure like with all the families and stuff? I mean, in particular, I mean, like there was the Gambino, Genovese, Bonanno, Lucchese, Colombo, and then basically that was the area that you were around. And then you met. Did you meet all of these guys, like certain guys
No,
in that time, or was it just?
no, it was so secretive. You didn't meet anybody. I mean, you heard rumors, or maybe you saw something in the newspaper. It was very hard to get accurate information. So you kind of just surmised that you knew there was five families from the public, news, and you really didn't get to know these people. I mean, they were very careful and shy about anybody young getting close to them, getting information. So you had to bide your time and listen to like a guy like Uncle Tony, things to say, things not to say, questions to ask, questions not to ask. Never ask anybody's name or where they come from, what do they do. It was very, very secretive.
Mhm.
That's just
And
the way it was.
And would you say over the years it became less and less secretive? I mean, people would know just straight up, like, hey, this guy's a wise guy, and you could just tell.
Yeah, and there's no doubt it slowly became a little bit more public. But I mean, that was through the 70s and the 80s. Of course, in the late 80s, when Gotti got all the publicity, everybody knew who the mob was and who were the main members. I mean, it was fascinating to see it go public.
Hmm.
I always thought that was fascinating to me. I mean, don't forget, I went to jail in 1974, and all these mob guys who were there. You learned a lot more because it was information that was let out while you were in jail, talking about who's who and who
Hmm.
was made, who wasn't made. And the guys that weren't made, a lot of those guys had information, the ones that were coming up at that time.
Hmm. And that's what's interesting too is like the feds or the newspaper, they would come out and be like, here's the mafia structure. This guy's a capo, and this one's the boss, the
Right,
underboss, the made
right,
men. These
right.
guys are under this crew. I mean,
Yeah,
that's when people started to become aware of it. And then like the mafia guys are like, man, this that they know when we're gonna make a guy a new member before we do,
yeah,
kind of deal,
yeah.
because
It
they
it
just.
it all changed. It went so public. Some of the guys liked it, and some of the guys didn't like it. They liked the image that they had. So it wasn't just the dressing and the clothing and the cars. It just all changed so rapidly.
Yeah, and then like I said, I think this would be a good time to wrap it up now and just really give people an understanding about what our podcast and our show is going to consist of. So, I think like me and you said, I think with each episode we're going to talk about something different about Sal's life, or hell, it might even be Sam Giancana or something, some
Right.
other kind of mafia history. But
Yeah.
it's all going to be interesting, and that we're going to do our homework. We'll do our research on any events. I mean, I always read books and all that kind of stuff. So any topics or anything that anybody else wants us to touch on as well, you can always comment and let us know what you think we should talk about, or if you got a question you want to ask Sal, I know we'll be sure to answer it. So I
Yeah.
think, what do you got, Sal?
It'd be fun. I like the historical part of it all. Being a young guy, going through all I went through, and looking at like even the previous history, like the 30s, the 40s, the 50s,
Mhm.
and then getting into the 70s and the 80s. Of course, never thought I'd be here, at 78 years old talking about this. So it's not a bunch of BS. It's really true. There is people that want to hear about it. We'll talk about it. I'm sure we'll do some live interviews. It could be fun.
Oh yeah.
But the information is I want to work at is primarily got to be accurate, pretty accurate stuff. What I went through, some of the people that I met along the way. It could be fun to talk
Yeah.
about this stuff.
Yeah, and I think you brought up another good thing to do because we could go on into the history even before your time. Like you
Right,
said, 20s, 30s. I mean, the Castellammarese War. With Joe
right.
Masseria, Lucky
Yeah,
Luciano,
yeah,
Maranzano, and just keep going. I mean, because it's all interesting and it's all about the mafia tales people are interested in. And
yeah.
if you guys haven't seen our video that me and Sal did an interview back, maybe it was in December something, but I finally posted it like a month ago because I always had racked up a bunch of interviews and stuff, and so yours came out last month in April, and
Yeah.
it's got like 48,000 views. So me and Sal decided that, hey, people are interested in Sal's story, and
Yeah.
maybe we should partner up, and that's what we did. And
Yeah.
we're gonna go into his stories and keep putting them out there, and again, just cover true crime. I mean, people are
Yeah.
interested in it.
Yeah, there's a lot I'd like to talk about aside from the things I did. I mean,
Mhm.
where the country is today with crime and social social media, the criminal justice system. I mean, the amount of shootings and murders that take place. Oh my God, I never thought I would see such things in my life.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, I have an interest in that. I've always had an interest in crime in a different way, not being a criminal anymore. So,
Yeah, I
let's
mean,
talk
and
about it. Should be fun.
yeah, and you were even to add more credibility to Sal, you were labeled as a criminal expert, or what they call you, the
Oh
FBI
yeah, an expert on crime after the
crime
Gotti
expert.
trial. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So Sal's the guy for all this, for all these stories and everything.
yeah.
But
Now we will be switching over to our second clip. This video has never been seen on YouTube, only on Patreon exclusively. But since Sal's sick, we made do with what we had. It's important for us to be consistent for you guys. In this clip, Sal takes us back to when he started learning all the rules to becoming a mobster. He also talks about meeting Joe Pistone and how funny John Gotti and Gene Gotti were. And he also talks about Dominic Cataldo becoming his mentor. This is a very interesting clip. I hope you enjoy it.
But between 66, 67, when my uncle went to jail, I was still learning about the function of organized crime and how it worked and how the upper echelon, put pressure on the guys in the middle. And they didn't want to meet new young guys. 20 some years old, you weren't going to go meet no made guy. It wasn't going to happen.
no, I
No.
mean, you had to work your way up there for quite a while and
Right.
build up that trust, because they, at that time, I'm sure there was. When did RICO come around? Because maybe that RICO indictment wasn't around in the 60s.
Well, it was around, but they didn't use the law.
Right.
They didn't use the RICO statute or the law,
So did
But
they
yeah.
have any big pinches back then that
Oh
made them
yeah, they
paranoid?
they had gambling arrests. Mostly the state of New York did that. But
Mhm.
we got to the point where we were paying off the local crime squad, like what they call the task force in New York City, like gambling, vice. It was all vice. And you could pay off that and get away with it, But that wasn't where the money was. Yeah, it was if you had you could make a big hit on a score if you hijacked a truck or you did a diamond score, but you also had to have somebody to work with. And Cataldo wasn't going to trust me to put a gun in my hand when I was 22, 24 years old. It wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, he had to expose you slowly and
Yeah,
build you up and groom you. And that's
right.
essentially, I mean, it's really portrayed really good. Have you seen the movie Donnie Brasco? I'm sure you have.
Oh, yeah.
Where,
Sure.
it's Al Pacino, right?
Right.
That
Yeah.
played Sonny
Right.
Black. And so
Right.
he's grooming Joe Pistone, also
Right.
known as
Yeah.
Donnie Brasco, and he's
Right.
like, a wise guy doesn't do
Yeah.
this, a wise guy doesn't do that. So, I
Yeah.
mean, essentially, was Dominic kind of like that for you and your uncle?
Yeah, pretty much overseeing you, grooming you, like schooling you. And by the way, you mentioned Joe Pistone. He actually was part of our movie Sinatra Club.
Really?
Yeah, we did an interview with him, and he talked about the initiation night. And
Oh.
Pistone and I talked a bunch. We talked a lot. Yeah.
You still, he might be someone to bring on the show, man.
Well, eventually, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he did a lot of stuff. And one of the guys that was in Sinatra Club, a guy named Leo Rossi, was one of his friends. And Leo Rossi's been around 50 years. And so Leo Rossi, he actually wrote the Gotti movie, the one that was a failure with Travolta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But Leo was a nice guy. And when I decided to do the voiceover for Sinatra Club, because the director who I hired said, no, you can't do it. You got to have a certain voice. You got to know how to do it. He said, I'll get you Leo Rossi to coach you. So I went for 3 days with Leo Rossi, and he coached me how to do the voiceover. And so he had been friends with Pistone, and that's how we got to talk.
Oh, okay. So that's pretty cool that he even with like a guy like you that he helped
Yeah,
take down, and you know,
yeah,
he's like, okay, well, now that you're reformed, I'm sure now I'll talk
yeah,
to you,
right,
because you know that is interesting because I interviewed Joe Bonanno's grandson, and his father was Bill Bonanno, and
right.
he told me that his father was him and Pistone partially wrote a book together.
Yeah, right, right. The way of the wise guy.
I'm pretty, I don't know the exact name, but yeah,
That
that
was the
sounds,
title. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So I
yeah. He was
mean,
a sharp guy.
yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. So he would go around and you know do this with other guys after the
Yeah,
life, especially the
right,
Bonanno family. I mean, he
right.
did that with Bill Bonanno.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that
yeah,
was a good. That was a very accurate film because there was little words that popped up in the movie like fugazi. People didn't know what that meant, and they learned all this terminology. It was funny. Like, and then the Italian wise guys would laugh. Hey, look, they use that word fugazi. You got a fugazi watch? You got a fugazi this?
you,
It's kind of funny.
yeah. No, I mean it is funny because eventually, I mean, when these movies and shit started coming out, were you active when these all these movies were coming out?
Oh yeah,
Because like I mean that would be another episode in itself, like
yeah,
what
yeah.
these wise guys' thoughts were on all these movies.
Oh
Because
yeah, I mean, it was fascinating. Of course, getting to Hollywood, we'll talk about it later. When they found out that I was deeply entrenched, then they looked at me like, "Up, this guy's an authority," And we actually had readings of scripts, and I had people show up, good actors, man. I mean, I'm telling you, one guy was in The Godfather. He read the Sinatra Code script. He goes, "Oh, this is great." But that's when it was 129 pages. Pages. When we
yeah,
finally did it, we didn't have any money, and we cut out a lot of the good stuff.
hey, it is good. I enjoyed the movie. I rewatched it again yesterday. We'll start talking about details about your movie, and
Yeah,
hopefully we can put up clips as we're talking, and
sure.
we
Yeah,
can, give people a visual and all
yeah.
that good stuff.
And
But
I'll send you the documentary because I
yeah,
know a lot of people haven't seen it. I think you might see the trailer, the Ubats trailer on
mhm,
YouTube. I think it's up there. But I'll
yeah,
send you the whole documentary. And in the documentary, which was done around the same time of the movie, we explain things. Because in a movie, sometimes you can't stop and explain what's going on. Like the guy on the bench with Foxy and I. We were funny together. Foxy said, "You put the guy in my trunk," that kind of thing. Well, that really happened. There was a guy in Foxy's trunk. I mean,
yeah.
a Gotti took Foxy's car and used it for murder.
Yeah, and see, that's what I was. I'm glad I rewatched the movie because all these events that popped up while I was watching, I'm like, holy crap, this is a whole nother episode in itself. And I
Right.
made a note, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It
yeah,
was a lot of funny stuff, because that life, you're facing death every day. So you better have a good sense of humor and
yeah,
laugh about stuff. I mean, you're either laughing or you're dying or you're crying or you're dying. I mean, it's just funny stuff that happens in that life. It really does.
yeah. I mean, I on my show that I did, on the Invest in Yourself podcast, I recently did an interview with the guy that was with Joey Gallo's crew. His name's Frank Di Matteo, and he said, he wrote a book about Carmine Galante, and I was like, so what was your guys' crew's thoughts when Carmine was killed? Because they had encounters a few times, and he's like, he's like, oh, Carmine died, and now he's like, that was pretty much it. He's like, we didn't really give a fuck. I mean, he said
No.
if we cried every time someone
Yeah.
died, we'd be crying every fucking day.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah. Well,
mean,
Gotti back in the day, after the Godfather movie, I mean, Gene Gotti, the younger brother of John, was a very funny guy. I mean, this guy would say things like, "Are you kidding me?" He said that. But John Gotti, like from the movie The Godfather, when they killed the guy, remember they killed the guy, said, "Leave the gun, take the cannolis," right? And then they went back and talked about it and said, "Oh, you won't hear from him anymore." Well, that's what Gotti started to use. When somebody got whacked in real life, you won't hear from him anymore. I
oh,
mean, that meant he was gone in
yeah,
history,
he
And
started portraying.
they don't miss a beat. They move on with life immediately. That's it.
Yeah, and that's what I got from when I was interviewed Frank. I mean, it
Yeah.
was pretty. And I was just like, when he said that, I just started laughing. Like, wow, that's fucked up. But I'm sure it's true in that
Yeah.
world, man. But whatever. I mean, that's just what it was. I mean, that's a whole nother life that
Yep.
they were involved with. But
Yeah. Funny stuff.
yeah, but I think where we kind of went on this tangent, we were talking about Dominic grooming you, and while you
Yeah.
guys were doing this um, gambling operation. He just kind of started grooming you, and he was doing his thing. So how long did that gambling operation last? Was it
Well,
for your whole career in the mob, or?
but after my uncle went to jail, I had to go visit him in the federal detention center in New York. And I went
Mhm.
to visit him. There was like a glass petition, and he said, "Look, just follow Dominic. He's a good one. He's going to be somebody special." He had
Mhm.
predicted he was going to be a made guy. So I went back and I told Dominic, "Yeah, my Uncle Tony really likes you," because my Uncle Tony knew Dominic's father from 30, 40 years earlier,
What was his name?
Sammy Cataldo.
Sammy Cataldo. I'll have
Yeah.
to look him up. I'm gonna put
Whole
some pictures
family.
in here.
Yeah, there won't be much on him. He was kind of quiet, but
Yeah.
Uncle Tony said, just follow Dominic. He knows the whole landscape. He knows what to do. You follow him. He's going to lead you in the right direction. And Dominic was schooling me for all kinds of stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, I couldn't get involved in the hijackings that they did in 68 and 69, but, I was sort of involved is what they called an outfielder, like you were allowed to go to where the merchandise was dropped off in a building. But I didn't really get any recognition until 1971 when I robbed the bank. When I went and
Mhm.
told Cataldo, well, that was it. Everything changed for me. For him, oh, he goes, okay, well, Botch, you're hardcore, man. Who'd you rob that bank with? And of course, we'll talk about the two senior citizen guys that I robbed the
Yeah.
bank with. But
Yeah, those guys. You got funny stories
yeah.
about them, man.
But
Because
for Cataldo to trust me with stuff, I mean, the bookmaking was no problem. He trusted
yeah,
me with all the bookmaking, all that kind of stuff. But as you graduated up in crime, you had to prove yourself. You had to prove that you could do certain things that other guys wouldn't do. There's a lot of guys that wouldn't go out and put a gun in their hand. They were what we call sneak thieves. And of course, I'll talk about the little sneak thief robbery that I did with Uncle Tony and gave him all the money in late 65 before he went to jail, and how we got that luncheonette which turned into Sal's Pizza.
yeah,
We'll
and
get to that. That's kind of a long story.
yeah. I was gonna say, so when you were proving yourself while you were being a bookie, what before the whole hijackings and stuff came, how else? What was there any other little schemes that you were doing to prove yourself, or any little other side things? Or I mean, I know it wasn't no big bank robbery, but I mean,
No.
how did you even continue to prove yourself during that time?
Well, it wasn't that much. I mean, I did know other thieves in the street, so I could possibly get some of the merchandise these thieves were coming up with and get it to Cataldo, and then Cataldo would introduce me to a fence, a guy who would buy stuff. But he was pretty protective with his connections. He didn't readily just, introduce me somebody who was a Highline Jewelry fence, but they had all these contacts. I mean, you got to understand, back in those days, you had cops that were corrupt, doctors that were corrupt, dentists that were corrupt, okay? You had all kinds of medical people that were corrupt. You could use those people. You had insurance people in the insurance business that were corrupt. And I might talk about a couple of the guys I met along that way. So Cataldo had all these people that were sort of, mildly criminal, but they weren't really criminals. They were on the side of crime. They would do things for the Italian mob guys that no one else could do, whether it was insurance scamming, whether it was whatever it was. There was a lot of people that honored the mob, whether it was fear or respect. I couldn't say from each person, but the mob guys had all these contacts, a lot of contacts. I got this guy, I got that guy. So it was interesting to meet these people that could do certain things.
Yeah, and I can sort of see why some of these legitimate people would be like, okay, we need the mob, because it's like another. Either way, I mean, you're gonna have to pay if they want it. You know what I mean? So
Right.
if you're gonna look at it as a benefit for you, these guys have all these connections, and they could
Right.
probably get this shit done for you right away. I don't know, maybe a discounted price. Who knows? Whatever it may be
Of
that you're getting
course.
involved with. But
Right.
I mean, when they have these connections and stuff, I mean, that's what they're essentially providing for you, that kind of service. But
Right.
either
Of
way, you're
course.
gonna have to take it. But I mean, that's probably why a lot of the people just cooperated. They're like, either way, we're gonna have to do this, or else something bad's gonna happen. So you know what? Let's just look at it at the bright side.
Right, right. Everybody had their contacts, and if you were connected to mob guys, you got introduced to certain people that could do things that others couldn't do. I mean, we learned about the corrupt cops. There was plenty of them that were corrupt, but
yeah.
there was also the guys that were hardcore. They wouldn't take a dime. So you had to know who was who.
Yeah, I mean that's just the thing. I mean, when you start trying to get law enforcement on your side, I mean that's a whole ball game in itself, because
Right.
you don't want to go up to the wrong guy and say, "Hey, you want to be, start working for us?" Because I mean they're already
Right.
on law enforcement,
Yeah.
So, but once it seems like the way that they build up to it is like, okay, they get some kind of dirt on this cop, and then they
Right.
approach them. I mean, it's not like you just go up to any random cop, right?
Right. Yeah, it was interesting to learn who was on the take and who wasn't. And in the gambling business, it was sort of like, a non-violent crime, criminal act, gambling. Nobody looked at it. It was like you were going to hurt somebody. It was vice. It was vice. It was gambling. If it was, I was never involved in prostitution, but those type of vice crimes, a lot of the cops looked the other way. They let it go because they were gamblers. They were gamblers. They wanted somebody to gamble with too.
Yeah, and you brought up prostitutions, and that clicks with me, because I was going to say, Lucky Luciano, a theory that was out there was that the way that he got out of prison was because he, from that, prostitution ring they
Right.
set him away for, they said that he got dirt on some high level person, and they let him out because he said, if you don't figure out how to get me the hell out of here, I'm gonna I'm gonna put this out there. So
Right.
I don't know. I just thought that having the whole thing we just talked about, having dirt on someone and being able to present that or whatever to the
Yeah.
public. I mean, these guys have their ways, man. That's just all I'm trying to get at. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
If
it
it's
was
true or
it
not.
was a trade-off. I mean, the trade-off was that if you had a cop on the take, you sort of paid him somehow, gave him stuff or money and privileges, and he gave you information. I mean, we're talking about a long time ago when you weren't able to look up anybody's name. It would take a week to get a printout on someone.
Yeah,
You
you
know?
couldn't just Facebook them, look them up
No.
online or something.
No, none of that, right? Yeah.
Okay, so when you were being a bookie at that time, was there turfs divided? I mean, like with the Lucchese's, the
Yes.
Gambinos, Genovese.
Yes. Yeah.
So
What you had to do is you had to go, like Dominic would go to the boss that he was reporting to, okay, and say, we got this operation in a certain part of Queens, which we were in Ozone Park, okay, and Woodhaven, Ozone Park. Well, actually, the way it happened was he had to go and put on record that I was working with him getting the gambling business in Ozone Park. Yet Andy Ruggiano, he had that whole area locked up. But
Fat Andy or Anthony
yeah,
Ruggiano?
Fat Andy.
Fat
Fat
Andy,
Andy, yeah. So he had that area locked up. But where I was sort of like across this main thoroughfare, Atlantic Avenue. And Dominic went to the captain and said, hey, I got this guy out there at this pizza joint. He's taking action. So I was covered for that. And Fat Andy, he didn't like that because he lived 100 yards away.
I'm sure.
Yeah. But it was okay. It lasted. It went on and on and on. And Dominic and him, they didn't like each other. But he was a made guy and Dominic wasn't. Eventually, when Dominic became a made guy in the Columbos, he had more authority, more juice.
Yeah. So you never had any turf disputes with any of the families because they was already well known who was working where.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you know? So I mean, you brought up Fat Andy that he was a bookmaker at the time. What about for the other families? Do you know like who was with Lucchese's, Genovese, Spadano?
No, I didn't pay much attention to those guys. I was sort of secluded. Cataldo took me away from those guys because there was a time when you were sort of like a freelance that you could be taken into another family in a moment. You could leave one family and go to another, like Seminy Bull left the Columbos, wound up with the Gambinos,
Yeah.
But some years later, like in the 70s, when Gotti came out of jail and I was making a whole lot of money, he went to Cataldo and said, let me have Ubats come with me. Cataldo said, no, no, no. Our families go back a lot of years. He's staying right here. So I was sort of protected in that way.
Did you ever want to be with Gotti though, or did you
No,
know he was on a whole
no.
different path that you didn't
Well,
want
I
to go?
knew, yeah, I knew he was on a different path, but he was such a flamboyant guy. A
Hmm.
lot of people thought he was a blowhard, and that he predicted he was going to be the boss of bosses. I didn't feel that way. I mean, I know he was a quiet manipulator, a loud manipulator. He can manipulate people, he can get things done, and he was building on his personality for years and years. And of course, some years later, when he got involved in the McBratney murder, that's what sort of like the fuel to ignite his star. Right? That was after sort of, well, it was during the Sinatra Club, yeah. But that was years later when we finally met. I didn't meet him until 72. So between 68, 69, and 72, I was doing this bookie stuff, and I was getting ready to become a heist guy. That's what I wanted to do. Hijack trucks, rob banks. I wanted to do that, rob diamonds. But I didn't have anybody to work with, so it took a while to find the right guy.
Yeah, it's all about the connections, like we've been saying.
Right.
But
Exactly.
I think now is a good time to wrap up. We're almost at that 45-minute mark. So, everybody, if you want to get the full interviews with me and Sal, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon channel. Also, please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy it, because we're going to have a lot of good interviews about Sal's life. We intend on having guests as well, other guys that were in the Mafia life, and maybe even some entertainers and stuff Sal met in Hollywood. I think that'd be
Right.
another cool aspect after the life. But when he was doing his movie about the Sinatra Club, I'll put the Sinatra Club link in the video description if you guys want to check it out and watch it. You can also buy Sal's books. He's got the Sinatra Club and then The Sins of the Father. And then I think my clothing brand website's in there as well. But yeah, if you want to keep getting the full interviews, I mean, just stay signed up to our Patreon account. And yeah, we're going to keep delivering some good videos. You got anything to add to that, Sal?
No, it's fun, sort of looking back, explaining the detail, because doing these interviews, you can include a lot of, you know, detail that people wouldn't, know about, even reading the book or seeing a movie. I mean, seeing a movie, you're so limited to the
Hmm.
amount of information that you can, you know, project.
Right.
And listening to me with the details, it is kind of fun because there was a lot of side stories
Hmm.
that, like the story with Joe Pistone and him advising us certain things. I mean, he was at the FBI, so it was things he knew about that life that we weren't familiar with. Way back, the whole thing with the Donnie Brasco movie. I mean, they did a lot of research to do that movie, and it was well prepared. It was first class movie. So he was involved in that, and then he was involved in doing. I think Leo Rossi, I believe, did a one man show in Chicago with Joe Pistone. If you look it up, the
Damn.
way of
Okay.
the wise guy, I think it was.
Hmm. I'll have to look that
So
one up then.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean, you're right when you say that you're limited when you read the movie or watch a movie, and then
right,
you read a book. I mean, when you watch a movie, it's like, okay, there's all this other stuff that's cut out because it's like it's got to be 90 minutes or whatever,
right,
and then the Sinatra Club is just about one day of your life,
yeah.
So that's
One day, yeah,
yeah, literally one day. So I mean, there's
yeah,
all this other stuff that went on in your life that
yeah,
we're gonna cover, but when you read a book too, I mean, you do the research. Not everything gets in there because not everybody wants to read a dictionary.
right,
I mean,
exactly,
so, but when you have the podcast and the interviews and stuff, it's more interesting. You
yeah,
can listen to it, and we get into all the side stories, and we can say, oh, well, this happened or this happened.
yeah.
Oh, think about this. So it is interesting. So I'm glad that we were able to partner up and do this podcast because I
I'm
think
sure
it's
when
good.
people call up, it's going to be kind of fun because there's people
Mhm.
that know things and they're going to ask us questions. That'll open up a whole piece of dialogue. Well,
Yeah.
I'd say to somebody, how did you know that? Well, I was there. Oh, okay. You were there. Okay. This is what was going on. But what, were you behind the scene or you was in the front of the scene? People do know things.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. We made best with what we had. You all have been subscribed to our show for so long now, and you've also been supporting us and sending in super chats, comments, likes, great feedback. I mean, it's been awesome, so thank you all for being so nice and always supporting us. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of video. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more future shows from us. If you want to get more exclusive videos like the one you got today, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. And the last thing that I'll bring up is I got my own podcast that I do called the Invest in Yourself podcast. On that podcast, I interview lots of ex-mobsters, gangsters, criminals, and they all have something in common. They all came to the realization that they wanted to change their life and become a better person. I've interviewed lots of people with great redemption stories, so if you enjoy mine and Sal's content, I know you'll enjoy those kind of videos, so please check it out. It's on the same YouTube channel. All you got to do is just go to the playlist option and click Invest in Yourself podcast, and you can see all my interviews. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one. If you would like to support our podcast, we got a few items that you can purchase. All of these items can be found in the video description below. The first one is Sal's book, The Sinatra Club. You can get this personally autographed by Sal. The next one in our hottest seller is the 1972 Sinatra Club playing cards. Back in Sal's Mafia days, he opened up his own social club named the Sinatra Club. Many mobsters would come to this club, even when there were all-out wars going on between different families. They would come to the Sinatra Club and play cards. Some of the mobsters that played with these cards were John Gotti, Dominic Cataldo, Tommy DeSimone, Foxy, Jimmy Burke, Willie Boy Johnson, Tony Roach, Henry Hill, Joe DeFede, Danny Fatico, Gene Gotti, Peter Gotti, Joey Scopo, and many more. We're selling each one of these cards for $10 a piece. These cards are limited, we only got 1,000 of them. The next item is an autographed picture of Sal from his Mafia days. Another item is the Dinner with the Mobster card. You can get this autographed as well. This was an event that Sal had hosted in the past. We also got the Ubat's production ticket from an event that Sal had hosted. This is also autographed. The last item we got to offer is Sal's book, The Sins of the Father. Again, you can find all these items in the video description below.